Well, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is finally out. I say finally, but technically it's been less than 4 years since Final Fantasy Remake came out, which, based on how long it takes games to develop and come out, that's actually a pretty big accomplishment, I would say, for Square Enix, especially with some of the stuff they've discussed and kind of the direction of this follow-up to Final Fantasy Remake from 2020. You know, I wasn't really sure necessarily going into this one if they'd be able to pull it off and make it feel like it's a substantial jump from what we had in Final Fantasy VII Remake and even Intergrade, where they, of course, raised the frame rate. It looked even better on the PS5, but I've played about 11 hours now of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth up to the end of Chapter 4, and I wanted to give some of my early impressions on what's probably going to end up being at least a 100-hour game for me because, spoiler ahead of time, yeah, I like this game. It's actually really, really good. So if you guys enjoy this video, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe if you're new. And in the interest of full disclosure, Square Enix did send over a digital copy of the game immediately at midnight when it went live, so I was able to pretty much jump into this right away. I'm going to do my best not to include any kind of footage that's going to spoil anything major in the first 11 hours, right? And while the big thing that I want to shy away from exists in the first 30 minutes of the game, it's pretty obvious what exactly is going to happen here if you completed Final Fantasy VII Remake, as it does pick up right from the end of that. So you kind of see some of the changes that have happened there and realize that we're not necessarily in remake territory anymore. We're in reimagining territory. I mean, this is just kind of like a whole new game with the same cast of characters and same events somewhat. Like, you still kind of see the things that you remember from the original Final Fantasy VII playing out here, but it's just completely different outside of just some of the locations and some of the characters, and even some of the big bosses that you'll realize recreate iconic scenes. That's at the opening, really who they have you set up as. It was pretty cool, and if you've been a longtime fan of Final Fantasy, especially going back to 7 and some of the spin-offs for it, I think you'll get a kick out of it right away. And if you've played the demo, you do get to skip the flashback that takes place with Sephiroth. So technically, my 11 hours would be like a little more than 12 hours if I hadn't played that. But nonetheless, the game itself early on doesn't waste a lot of time getting things going and getting you to that what I would call, or what a lot of people call now, the Oblivion or the Fallout moment, where you walk outside and there's this big open world in front of you. Remember, that's the big thing that Rebirth is leveraging here to differentiate it from Remake. Remake was very confined and constricting at times. Rebirth is the complete polar opposite. They immediately throw you into what, I mean, they're calling it like kind of open world, but it's more open zone, I guess. Like, they're clearly separated from each other in objectives and even kind of landscapes and that sort of thing. But technically, yes, you can go from one and then eventually traverse to the other with some sort of travel or maybe like a load screen or something in between. But it does feel incredibly open compared to Remake. And in order to give you a bunch of stuff to do in that open world, they do kind of lean a bit in the Ubisoft direction of having a bunch of sub-objectives on the map. So you sort of have objectives, then you have side quests, then you have your main quests. The objectives on the map do kind of range from activate a tower, fight a monster that has a list of objectives attached to it, maybe find some sort of crystal that will give you more knowledge of the planet or that region, but it all kind of breaks down to doing the same thing at each spot. Okay, so keep that in mind. There is going to be some fatigue, I'm sure, that sets in over time, but the thing I've noticed is it's not necessarily required to do every single one to complete like 100% for each map as you progress. And actually, a few times I got to the point where I was like, yeah, I feel like I've done enough here for now. I'm just going to move on and continue the main quest. And I think that is the correct way to go, because otherwise I'd probably be 11 hours in and seeing maybe like half an hour of the main story. They do also get you your Chocobo pretty quickly as well, which is a key part of traversing around faster. I mean, the map, when you first see it and you zoom out, you go, wow, this is a really big map. But then you actually start moving around it and you realize it's not necessarily as large as it's drawn out. And then you get a chocobo and you're just kind of turboing around the map itself. They also have other chocobo, like I got a mountain chocobo, for example. And it seems that the chocobos themselves will also be playing into a bunch of different quests because they have the ability to essentially pick up scents and then dig up different items that are buried. Also, I've noticed that running around the open world itself is kind of janky at times, depending on the terrain that's around you. If it's just like open field, you're good. You can just sprint ahead. But if there's some sort of elevation happening, whether it's just like a cliffside, different rocks in front of you, it ends up being kind of a dice roll, and if you can even go over it the first time. Most of the time, I would run into it, nothing would happen, I would stop, back up, then go again, and then Cloud would all of a sudden hop over it, or my chocobo would then jump up or down on the cliff. So, unfortunately, not as smooth when you're running around, and then they have you do some climbing, which is even worse somehow. And at that time, whenever I do climbing in some of these games, then it's like, ooh, it does make me appreciate what Ubisoft's been able to do with something like Assassin's Creed, because this kind of shows you what basic to below average climbing can look like. We also have a bunch of fast travel points around the map, and some of them you activate at different chocobo stops. Others will just auto-populate on your map when you get to like a large town or a big event that happens throughout the game. And then on top of all of that, there's a card game called Queen's Blood. And you'll regularly be told that there are people in this new area that you found that will play Queen's Blood with you. And the best way I could really explain and compare Queen's Blood would be a card game that also employs like elements of chess to it. So really you have like 3 rows and you try to get the most points in each row, and then they all add up at the end, and whoever just has the most points overall wins. Each match takes maybe 2 or 3 minutes at most, and you do get cards as you play through. Some of them have so far intertwined with different quests. And I am wondering if, as we have had card games in the past, or even just kind of side sports in Final Fantasy games, if eventually this will work into maybe something at the end game, whether it's a summon or a really strong material that you need to build an ultimate weapon. That's kind of what I'm wondering for Queen's Blood, because I do enjoy it. Like, it's a fun kind of distraction, but I would like there to be some carrot at the end of the stick when we get further down the line. The battles themselves it's still pretty similar in structure to what we did with Final Fantasy VII Remake, but they have a few wrinkles, notably some of the synergy attacks where you'll basically have tag team moves with some of your allies as you go through it. You can do that pretty easily. You kind of block with R1, and then it'll show up with a different button prompts with a square or triangle, and you can work together. Like, one was pretty cool is Barrett shoots Cloud with bullets and you kind of reflect them towards different enemies. And then there's like these ultimate tag team moves you can have where you build up like limit break sort of, and then you have this big screen clearing kind of attack. You still have your summons, of course, and if you've played Final Fantasy VII Remake and you have a save file, you'll get Leviathan right away, and it's worked pretty well so far. Oh, and as for just progression in general for my characters and my party, you have multiple different avenues to level up. So you have your main character's level, you have your materia level, you have your weapon level, and then you have your party level. Now, the party level appears to be affected by different objectives that you complete in the world, whereas your character level, your weapon level, those all sort of move up as you win battles or do different side quests. And then, of course, your materia follows along from there based on what you have equipped to your character's weapon. The party level, as that goes up, you'll seemingly get points for this thing that looks kind of looks like a sphere grid, but really it's just sort of a skill tree that you work your way through, and it will add different synergy or tag team abilities and different passive buffs. So for your HP or your base attack damage, that sort of thing. The weapon leveling, I'm still not really sure exactly what's going on here, although I've only leveled up like twice maybe. I think my weapon level is 3, almost 4, and as far as I can tell at this time, as I've gone up in level, I've gained different passive abilities I can equip or unequip, and then I have like 1 slot. So I'm thinking that when I get to a certain milestone for my weapon level, I'll unlock another slot, and maybe I get to a position where I can just kind of build out these passive abilities and create like an ultimate weapon sort of thing, but that seems to be still early going. Red 13 is fully playable here, and in fact, there are a few other characters I've seen so far that I feel like will become party here in a bit. But I have noticed that some boss battles I've gone through do require legitimate strategy with them. And there have been times where I've had to play as like Barrett or Tifa, for example, because they do give me the best option with some of their moves to win. But so far, like the boss battles have been good. I haven't had any moment going through the game so far where it's taken longer than it needed to. So one of my complaints with Remake is that there are obvious moments where it's just drawn out, so they could reach some sort of arbitrary number for the amount of hours it takes to complete it. I'm thinking of things like the sewers that just went on and on and on. I haven't had that moment yet in Rebirth. There was like a kind of a dungeon with in the mines that I was at one point going, okay, are we about to get to that threshold where I realized that this is padded out? But it actually ended right as I was starting to think about it. So not yet, but there's still plenty in front of me. The visuals are a strange case right now because you have performance or you have graphics mode. Graphics mode is, of course, prioritizing the resolution over the frame rate, in which case it locks it to 30. And it seems to have locked well enough there, and it definitely looks much sharper than performance mode, but performance is 60 frames per second, and in battles anyway, that does give you seemingly a somewhat of an advantage in terms of being able to dodge or block correctly, as you will get some bonuses for blocking or dodging at just the right time. But the game looks extremely blurry, I will say, in performance mode, and this has already been discussed by Square, and they've pushed a patch for the demo to try to solve that a bit, but it's still not quite there. Unfortunately, that mode does come with some Vaseline effect on the screen, so I've kind of done 50-50. Like, I've played half in performance mode, half in graphics mode, trying to figure out which one I'm going to be using going forward, and I'm still kind of mixed on it, so it's a tough situation. But hey, the PS5 Pro is right around the corner, so there you go. Later on this year, we'll have it solved one way or the other. The story so far was slow going early on, and they have worked to build it up since with the end of Chapter 4. That seemed to be kind of a big turning point for the game, and I am very intrigued to see where all of this goes. As you know, and as Square has mentioned, it has a lot to do with, go figure, Sephiroth. And yeah, it seems to be the way that the adventure has kind of turned now. So I'm interested to see some of the locations that they go through, and what they've set up so far does have at least that twinge of mystery, not only with the end of Remake, kind of know the different dimensions, timelines, whatever you want to call them, but also some of the other characters around you that you're, we'll say, following right now. They have played into some of the mystery stuff to where I feel like when you beat the game, you're going to want to go back to see different parts with new knowledge and some of the different events. But so far, I'm having an absolute blast with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and it really does feel like that true sequel that's not just more of the same. In fact, across the board, from what I'm seeing right now, it's like leaps and bounds ahead of Final Fantasy VII Remake in pretty much every way outside of Intergrade and the performance they had there. I really think they figured it out with a balance of visuals and performance there. But I mean, you look at Rebirth, and they are trying to do quite a bit more with the environments and sort of the freedom that they're giving you with these open world areas. But let me know what you guys think about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth down below in the comments, especially if you had a chance to pick it up and play it. What do you think about it so far compared to your time with Final Fantasy VII Remake? Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.